Good afternoon. Thank you for attending the session. You guys all made it. I think I'm the last one for the junior stage. So today I'm going to talk about unified liquidity standard for staking and crowdloan assets. So we'll jump right in. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Terry, one of the co-founders of Nuts Finance. We've been building on blockchain since early 2018, started on Ethereum, mainly doing financial primitives projects and solutions. So we've built middlewares, we've built applications, and we've also done protocols. It was last year, 2021, in around February, where we got introduced to Web3 Foundation, and that was the time where we transitioned ourselves from the Ethereum ecosystem into Polkadot. So it's been roughly 15 months of building in the Polkadot ecosystem, and so far feedback has been absolutely amazing. So with that being said, the name Nuts Finance, where does it come from? So basically our mission is to create the nuts and bolts to enable an open financial ecosystem on the blockchain. So our bread and butter is mainly the stuff that enables financial applications. That's what we're good at building. And our first implementation on the Polkadot ecosystem is the Tapio Protocol, which is launched on the Akala network, and Tapio Protocol, which is launched on Karua network. So, just by a show of hands, I just want to see, who here right now is staking or has participated in crowdloans. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So there was a talk earlier this morning at the main stage by Jonas, which talks about using learning algorithm to pick validators. So I thought that was a really interesting talk, and the solutions that these guys provided is absolutely innovative. And why did they sort of put this together? It's because staking, finding a validator is actually not that easy. Like if you were to go through the native route of staking your DOT. Okay, so that's one way. And obviously with the crowdloan auctions, that's a different types of application for the native DOT asset. So right now there are mainly two primary use cases for the native DOT asset. One, stake. Two, crowdloans. So what's the derivatives? Okay, so because staking in itself, the native staking process in itself is not that simple. So there are parachain teams that have built out liquid staking solutions to help DOT holders to stake their assets a lot easier. Okay, make the whole process much more user-friendly. So for example, Akala has launched the liquid staking DOT service, which is absolutely popular. And then on the other side, when you stake your DOT via the liquid staking solutions, you get a derivative token in return, which is called LDOT. And there are other parachain teams right now that are offering similar solutions. So that's staking derivatives. For crowdloan derivatives, on the other hand, this is when you contribute your DOT to help a parachain secure a lease from the slot auction. Okay? So the slot auction period, like the unlocking period, is around 96 weeks. And that's also why a lot of these parachain teams have introduced liquid crowdloan services, so then users have a more flexible redemption way of not just locking up those liquidity. Okay, so that's sort of a little bit of a background on the two types of derivatives right now in the Polkadot ecosystem. And 15 months ago, when we first entered the Polkadot ecosystem, one of the theses that we had was a lot of parachains are going to introduce new forms of staking as well as crowdloan derivatives. Because when you think about it, those liquidity that are locked in, they're pretty much just sitting idle. So these parachain teams obviously want users to make use of those assets. So that's why right now we're seeing a lot of different versions. So I'm going to talk about the benefits, right, of staking and crowdloan derivatives. There's a few. Number one, mainly higher yields. Okay, because usually what happens is parachain teams, they top up additional rewards or incentive mechanisms for you to stake through them. The second benefit is it unlocks liquidity for use cases. So I've listed DeFi use cases in this particular example, because that's what a lot of these use cases are currently being built for. For example, you could trade the liquid tokens, you could borrow against them, you could stake it, and you could make earnings on top of it. And then the third benefit is lower participation requirement. So for this point, I would say so far right now, the requirement is not absolutely extremely high, but when we look into the future, 5 years down the road, if the DOT asset becomes relatively expensive, then the requirement is actually much higher for people to stake or participate in crowd loans. So that's also another benefit for using these derivatives formats of staking and crowd loan. And then finally, which is also one of the most important benefits of derivatives, of using derivatives, is flexible redemption period. So for the liquid staking DOT, the unbonding period takes around 28 days. And for crowd loan, it takes up to 96 weeks, so 2 years. So as I mentioned earlier, those assets takes time to kind of get back and redeem. And when it's locked, you can't really use them. So that's, again, going back to the main point, staking and crowd loan derivatives offers increased utility and flexibility for locked staked tokens. Sounds magical, right? So now I'm going to talk about the problems. Okay, some of the problems associated with staking and crowd loan derivatives. Two main problems, and this is also one of our thesis when we were looking into the ecosystem 15 months ago. Number one, with these different variations of staking and crowd loan formats, it's going to create liquidity silos. Okay, so right now there are like 5 different versions of liquid staking DOT. Each of these represent little side pockets of liquidity. Okay, so what that leads to is it isolates these liquidity into very specific use case. Okay? The second major problem is adoption challenge. So when you're thinking from the parachains that have launched these staking or crowd loan derivatives, what happens is, down the line, there is going to become, category leaders in the sense that certain staking DOT or certain crowd loan DOT is going to have more volume relative to others. So that's going to create long tail derivatives asset. So what's wrong with having long tail? Nobody uses long tail. From an application builder's point of view, they're going to think about, hey, which one should I support? Obviously, they're going to support the ones that obviously have the most volume because that's how they attract the liquidity. So what's going to happen to the long tail assets? So that's the second major problem that we sort of saw when the space is proliferated with different versions of staking and crowd loan derivatives DOT. So ultimately, different staking and crowd loan derivatives format causes liquidity fragmentation, which reduces overall capital efficiency. So kind of redundant because the whole point of having these, staking and crowd loan DOT to begin with is to increase usability. But because there are so many different versions of them, it segmentizes them, which reduces overall capital efficiency. So for the second part of today's talk, I'm going to talk about our project, Tapio Protocol, which is currently live on Akala. So very generic definition, Tapio is a synthetic asset protocol designed to unify different formats of staking and crowd loan assets into a highly efficient standard. So what does that mean? Okay, without going through the definition, very simple example is there's all these different versions of staking and crowd loan DOTs. From a user's perspective, right now you're holding these derivatives. What you can do is roll these different types of staking and crowd loan derivatives into our synthetic asset called tDOT. So I'm going to talk about the benefits, but tDOT, what it does is it gives you usability across different use cases, and it maintains the underlying benefits, which are the staking yield as well as the parachain rewards if we're talking about crowd loans. All right, so introducing tDOT, just 3 very simple points. Number 1, it's a unified standard for staking and crowd loan derivatives, DOT derivatives. Number 2, it's backed by a liquidity pool composed of native DOT and one version of DOT derivatives. So whether it's a liquid staking DOT or whether it's a liquid crowd loan DOT, it's always a sort of paired against the native DOT asset. And then the third point I mentioned, we're actually the first synthetic DOT asset launched on the Akala ecosystem. All right, benefits of tDOT. So there's actually a number of them. The first one being it maintains a peg against native DOT. So what that means is you can always redeem tDOT back into a native DOT or into a liquid staking DOT. We've been getting quite a number of questions around, how does the pegging mechanism work in light of the recent events with, different types of synthetic solutions. So one thing that I would like to share is if you think in terms of the DOT standard, tDOT actually maintains a very good peg because you can always redeem it back into DOT or liquid staking DOT. And if you believe that liquid staking DOT, after the 28 days unbonding period, you can get that back into a DOT, then that's a peg. Okay, you can always get that tDOT back into a DOT. Okay, so number one, that's a major advantage. Number two, re-standardizes the yield as well as the rewards handling, because different parachain teams have introduced their own yield accrual methods as well as their own unbonding or Crowdloan rewards mechanisms. So we basically standardizes the whole process. So basically making the tDOT usable across different use cases. And then the third benefit is sustainable and competitive yield. Okay, so I want to elaborate a little bit on this point. Right now, tDOT is composed of native DOT and LDOT. So there are three sources of yield that goes into tDOT right now. So there's the underlying staking yield that accrues from LDOT, because LDOT right now pays roughly 16 to 18% yield. So that yield gets accrued to tDOT. So that's one source of yield. The second source of yield is from the Tapio Protocol. Okay, the Tapio Protocol is actually powered by a stable swap engine. So what that is if let's say a user or you guys are holding LDOT, you need to swap that back into DOT instantaneously. This function is available on Kala, by the way, and it's supported by us. You pay a swap fee. So that swap fee is also another form of yield that gets accrued back to tDOT. And then the third source of yield is potential incentives from our own protocol. So this piece is not launched yet, but you can look at it as like overall, tDOT is made up of 3 different flavors of yield, and out of those 3 different flavors, 2 of them are very much sustainable. And then the last point is tDOT as a whole, based on the three different benefits, it's highly usable across the entire Polkadot ecosystem. And I'm going to dive into how can you actually use tDOT. All right, so the first use case, I kind of mentioned that already. The tDOT is powered by a stable asset system, so it's basically a stable swap engine. So whenever you need to make that swap between LDOT and DOT or LC DOT and DOT, that function is powered by us. So number one, it serves as a stable swap engine, okay, for different parachains. Obviously, that implementation has already been completed on Akala as well as Karura. The second use case is using tDOT in different DeFi primitives. So one of them is obviously using tDOT as a collateral type to mint AUSD. So that's something that we're working on together with the Akala team as well as the Gauntlet team to make sure the risk parameters are, it's safe to actually use it as a collateral. But basically, that's the goal of using tDOT as a collateral type. And then finally, there's lending, which is, Dan obviously today, this afternoon, made the reveal for Pike. Pike is actually the money market that we're building in collaboration with the Akala team, because it just makes natural sense for us to extend the use case for tDOT. Because tDOT, when you look at it, it's a standardized synthetic that has underlying sustainable yield. So a very natural extension to that is to make that asset become a collateral that people can use it to borrow against. So the third use case is parachain liquidity optimization. So this point kind of goes back to, maybe a year or 2 years down the line, some parachains that have offered these staking and Crowdloan derivatives, their assets are just not being adopted. So they become long tail. So what do? Do they just abandon them? Do they just tell their users to, hey, just redeem these liquidity back in the DOT, like we're not going to service you anymore? I don't think that's going to happen. We also think that there's going to be more and more different versions of staking and Crowdloan DOTs. So the third use case is perfect for that. What we do is we can deploy our stable asset system on other parachains that helps them aggregate their long tail derivatives liquidity. So then tDOT gets formed, and then once tDOT is formed, that unlocks the use cases, such as lending, collateral, staking. And then from an application builder's point of view, it also helps parachains to onboard new DApp builders, new application builders. Because instead of telling them that, hey, we have this super long tail derivative that you guys can use, you can use tDOT, which is the standard. And then finally, the last use case is cross-parachain swap. So this is obviously enabled by XCM. So what that means is that Tapio and tDOT is a very natural cross-parachain swap mechanism. So the example that I'm going to give here is, for example, derivative .A is available on parachain A. So you use that to mint tDOT. With XCM, you transfer that tDOT to parachain B, and you redeem it back into derivative .B. So that process in itself, you've just done a cross-chain transaction. Okay? So these are the 4 use cases right now that are all available. So this slide goes through how it works. I kind of mentioned that the tDOT is powered by the stable swap engine. One thing that I did not mention is the minting of the tDOT function lives on the Akala chain. And that was one decision that we've made back when we started working together with the Akala team, is that there obviously the DeFi hub in the Polkadot network needs ample amount of liquidity, and it makes sense for that liquidity to be to use that liquidity to mint tDOT. And then now with XCM open, tDOT can actually transfer freely to other parachains. All right, this is the final section. I'm going to talk a little bit about the milestones and sort of development goals that we've hit. So we've been building in Polkadot, and specifically alongside the Akala team, for 15 months, unlocked a number of milestones. We've received 2 Web3 Foundation grants, Wave 9 and Wave 13, just based on our stable asset system. We're also one of the first teams to receive the Akala ecosystem grant. And for those builders that are out there right now that's considering which parachains to build on top of, I would highly recommend talking to the Akala team, one of the finest builders in the space. I didn't mention too much, but so obviously we have Tiger, we have Tapio on the Akala side, but we also have Tapio Protocol, which has been launched and live for around 5 months. It's living on Karura right now, and we have 2 products that are live on the Karura side. One of them is called TiKSM. So it's a synthetic version of KSM. So it's made up of KSM and liquid staking KSM. The purpose why we launched that first on Karura is to test out the implementation, before we moved on to the Akala side with DOT. And then the second product that we have live right now on Karura is 3Pool. For those who are familiar with Curve, Curve obviously has their infamous 3Pool made up of 3 different kinds of stablecoins. I didn't mention too much about the stablecoin stuff because it doesn't produce a synthetic asset on our side, because obviously we want to work together with AUSD to help them drive adoption. So with our 3Pool, what happens is users can contribute either AUSD, USDC, or USDT. So USDT is natively minted on StateMine. USDC is being bridged over from Wormhole. So this integration is already live. But what happens is you just basically contribute your stablecoin liquidity. It serves as the stable swap engine for the Karura ecosystem. And then with the 3Pool, we actually received 20,000 KSM from the Kusama Treasury as a subsidy to help us bootstrap the 3Pool. So this was one of the major milestones that we've unlocked last month. So overall, if you guys look at, if you guys are trying to identify, ways to, park your stablecoins, or whether it's your DOT or KSM, look no further than, the Akala as well as the Karura ecosystem. So this is just a quick slide on our solution, because you guys might be wondering, like, okay, where's the DApp? I want to log in and throw my assets on there immediately. We're deeply integrated into the Akala and Karura product. So this screenshot right here, it just shows you, how to add your DOT or LDOT liquidity. It's actually embedded into their swap and liquidity function. Okay, once you add dot and L dot, tDOT gets minted, and then you can use that tDOT in any shape or form. The second slide, the second screenshot here just basically shows you, the incentives breakout. And then there's a dashboard at the bottom that shows you, the yield composition as well as the number of tDOT that's currently minted. So tDOT has been live for around 2 weeks. We have around 136K tDOT minted. And we'll be, one of the main efforts that we'll be driving in the next couple of weeks is to call in, DOT liquidity. So, as a recap, Tapio Protocol offers a single liquidity standard, to unify different formats of staking and Crowdloan derivatives. We see this as a major problem, and we see this, as an ongoing sort of issue that, as more parachains come alive, they're going to introduce their own staking and Crowdloan derivatives as well. So we want to become that standard. Okay, we don't compete with their liquidity. We're sitting on top of them, actually. So there's different versions of staking and Crowdloan derivatives. tDOT is on top of that. So our solutions are specifically designed for 3 groups of people. Number 1, DOT and KSM holders. Number 2, parachains. If you're a parachain looking for liquidity, looking to optimize your liquidity, talk to us. And then finally, DApp builders. So if you want to create a sustainable ecosystem for your DApp builders to build stuff on your parachains, then I believe we're the right team to talk to. Socials, for those who is interested. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks very much. Where are you going?
Oh, good.
Sir. All right, so we do have some time for some questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and a mic will come to you. We have 2 here. I think we have 1 and then 2. Sorry to point, I'm just sufficient.
Yeah, they just jump in. It's both derivatives offering options on chain.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I just think.
Hey Terry, big fan of the stablecoin pool and the tDOT product. I'm just more wondering, where do you see Tapio going long term? I know you kind of are centering yourselves as like the derivative project on, Acala and the Polkadot world. Do you ever see that, branching off into other types of derivatives like options or swap contracts? Or do you kind of want to focus on just, staking assets and Crowdloan assets? What's your kind of, for want of a better term, your grand plan on what future products you'll offer, 24 months down the line?
Yeah, 24 months is a long time in crypto, but I'll try to tackle that question, right? So right now, we're very focused on becoming, the standardized asset protocol. So what that means is that we want to take care of assets. We want to make the assets become a standard adopted by different parachain teams. So specifically what we're doing right now is, now that our solutions is pretty much live, deployed, and kind of tested, on both Karura and Acala, we're expanding into other parachains. So there's a few parachains that's in the pipeline that we are doing deployment work on right now. So that's one of the biggest initiatives. The second initiative is to continue to drive use case for these synthetic. So when you look at it, we have 3 products live right now. We have tDOT, we have TiKSM, and then we also have the 3 pool. So 3 pool doesn't have the synthetic, okay? But at least for tDOT and for TiKSM, what we're doing is we're working with application teams. So there's one team that we're talking to right now, I'm not going to disclose any names, but basically making tDOT as a collateral for margin trading. So it's use cases like that that could help the asset become the standard. And that's, I would say, I don't want to say 24 months, but because it all depends on how quick the Polkadot ecosystem grows. But that's our primary focus, to make that to become sort of the standard.
Oh yeah, big fan. You are my favorite investment that is incredibly hard to explain to my grandmother. I was curious about your relationship with Acala, like what it was like to because when you showed up, it was where I started getting what it was Akala was doing, where they just kind of sunsetted a product of their own and like just jacked in a thing from the ecosystem. Like, how did that come to be? Because you didn't launch a product on your own first. Like, what's it like to work as a developer in the Akala ecosystem is perhaps what I'm getting at.
Yeah, great question. So I did mention that we started building in the space since 2018. Experienced blockchain builders, especially within financial primitive space. I come from traditional finance background. We've worked with different teams on the Ethereum side as well. Don't want to elaborate too much, but basically the approach, I would say, from Web3 Foundation as a whole is very different, and it's in the good sense. Okay, so when we first got in touch with Web3 Foundation, we were actually introduced by a parachain team, by the way, to speak with Web3 Foundation because they saw the stuff that we built on the Ethereum side. They're like, oh my god, like Polkadot is just launching up right now. Like, go talk to Web3 Foundation because a lot of your stuff can be mapped over. Not in terms of just like copy and pasta, right? But in terms of the actual value prop. So we started that process last year in January, and Web3 Foundation actually introduced 3 teams for us to speak with. It was Akala, Plasm at the time, Astar now, and Moonbeam. We spoke with each one of them, and the evaluation process was more so on the vision of the teams. So for us at that time, the narrative for Akala was DeFi hub, right? In our sense, DeFi hub also means liquidity hub. If we wanted to do like if we wanted to become an asset standard, we need liquidity. So your next question might be, okay, so why not Moonbeam? Because obviously they've done a phenomenal job with attracting liquidity as well. For us, the biggest difference to build on Polkadot is their substrate level technology, not EVM. So that's why it was relatively clear for us after speaking with the different teams that Akala was sort of, we share a very similar vision. And then we went through this, I think, 4 to 5 months of code dating process where we really got to know, their way of doing things, how they built their technology stack. And then on top of that, from a builder's perspective, the Akala team provided all-round support around, building out your growth functions, making sure, you're speaking with, introducing to the right investors to talk to. So all in all, right, to answer your question, we had an absolutely phenomenal time working with the Akala team. So that's why, for any early stage projects that's evaluating different parachains, definitely do consider, Akala. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, awesome, great.
Hello.
Hey.
Great talk, thank you. When you say the asset standard, do you guys have in vision for your palette something else than ORML palette or palette assets? Do you get where I'm getting with it?
Your question was,
If I would be, for example, another parachain, I wanted to establish a communication with you guys, do you then rely on the calls that are based on ORML, standard swaps, standard transfers, or perhaps you guys using the palette assets for multiple assets, or is it just something that you develop by your own, the API that you're providing by your own asset standards?
So just to make sure I understand your question, you're asking like, if let's say we're deploying on other parachains, are we deploying them as palette, or are we using other forms to make that communication between the assets? Is that the question?
Right, like how would you describe the closest API that you propose for your stable?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts to that question. Number 1 is our solutions are built in substrate palettes, so we would need to, so for the parachains that we're expanding outside of the Akala ecosystem, the optimal solution is to deploy those palettes onto their parachains as well. That's number 1. However, that's not a must, because with right now XCM being enabled, we don't necessarily need to deploy those palettes. It's just that users on the other parachains, they cannot contribute those derivatives liquidity on their parachains. They would need to use XCM to bring that back onto Akala, which has the tDOT minting function, to mint tDOT. So that is basically, the second part, which is enabled by XCM. So I would say our solution is supported by both in a permission way. Permission in the sense that we need to get their permission to deploy our pallets on their parachains, so then we could help them aggregate those liquidity. But in a permissionless way, is you're just relying on basically XCM to transfer those.
XCM, and then specifically you just have some pallet calls, via transact, XCM transact.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess this is probably what I was asking for. I can just look at the code base later.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.